Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the panel. It's great to see so many people here and to have so many people joining us online. I think you're in for a really exciting and insightful hour. We've got a great panel lined up, and we're going to get into some really practical tools that companies all across the jewellery industry will be able to use, but more of that in a moment. So the focus of the panel, as you know, is to highlight some practical tools and frameworks, but to do that against the backdrop of geopolitical shifts and trends which we've all been aware of that have been happening in the market. We'll talk about a couple of specific tools in particular, including the wheel and how it can be put into practice, and also some tools from the Watch and Jewellery Initiative 2030. And the intention is that the session will offer insight and challenge that can inspire urgent action, but also to help companies across the jewellery sector to take action. So I'd like to introduce our panellists. First of all, I'm John. I'll be moderating today's session. I've got 25 plus years experience in ESG, and I've been involved with CIBJO now for 3 years, including developing the wheel that many of you will be familiar with, which was a couple of years ago, and also the measurement guidelines, which came out last year. Wesley is the chair of the Laboratory Grown Diamond Committee, and has also been involved with some of those tools over the last 2 or 3 years, and has 25 years plus experience of ESG and a wealth of experience of the diamond industry in particular. Helen is joining us online from the UK, and Helen gives us a much broader and richer context around ESG, not only from this industry, but from a whole range of other industries as well. Which is going to be really helpful on this panel in framing the context for what's happening in the jewellery initiative, in the jewellery industry.
Good morning.
John, again, has a huge amount of experience in ESG, President of the Sustainable Development Commission and CIBJO Board Director, and Head of Sustainability Strategy and Climate Change at the World Gold Council, plus a whole load of other experience as well, including convening the Gold Principles Group. And John has more than 20 years experience working in precious metals, jewellery and sustainability. And then Iris, adding even more experience to this panel, Director of the Watch and Jewellery Initiative 2030, over 20 years experience in the jewellery sector, but also ESG and sustainability, and Vice President of the CIBJO Sustainable Development Commission. So I wasn't going to go through every bullet point on this slide. There's probably 100 bullet points that aren't included on the slide as well. I guess the key message here is we have a very experienced and knowledgeable panel on the jewellery sector and ESG, including in other sectors as well. Before we dive in and I turn to the panel, and I promise not to do all of the talking here and make sure that the panel are providing their insights, I just wanted to set the context. So I was going to start with progress, in particular over the last year. So this is the largest offshore wind turbine project in the UK. It's a 26 megawatt wind turbine. These things are the height of a 60-story building, and they can power 55,000 homes. And China in particular is taking a lead on offshore wind, driving capacity and use of offshore wind, but also solar and a whole range of other renewable energy sources. And that's happening at a huge pace. This is a chart of energy generation in South Australia. It's quite hard to see the legend, but the yellow on here is solar energy, the green is wind energy, and the purple is interconnectors, so taking renewable energy in particular from other states in Australia. And this is an example of a particular week in South Australia where more than 100% of energy was generated through zero carbon technologies. And I could have picked from hundreds of examples, thousands of examples around the world of this type of thing, where renewable energy has now overtaken fossil fuels to the extent where it's 100% or more of generation in many different places in the world. So there's been huge progress over the last year. But as we all know, there's also been some reality checks. So in Europe, key ESG regulations, so the CSRD in particular, have been challenged by several governments, including Germany and France, in Italy and others, that have not put the brakes on regulation, but have tempered regulation over the last year. In the US, the momentum around ESG hasn't stalled, but it's been, the messaging coming out of the new administration in particular has been challenging to ESG progress. And the tensions between what's happening in the US, what's happening in China, and Europe sitting somewhere in between, means that ESG over the last year has had some challenges. But what hasn't changed is the science. So 2024 was the hottest year ever recorded, and it was about 1.55 degrees warmer than pre-industrial levels. So pre-industrial levels, 13.7 degrees, we're now at 15.2 and rising. And that science doesn't change. And then finally, the impact. So many of us have been on summer holidays and have seen almost firsthand the impact of climate change. This is a photograph from Spain. I was on holiday earlier this year in Scotland and came face to face with a bushfire, which is almost unheard of in the UK. And the number of fires this year has exceeded all records. So we see both momentum and setbacks for our industry and for other industries as well. And what that means is huge challenges, but also opportunities to confront and address some of these issues. As a trade association, CIBJO can play a powerful role. So while it can't force adoption, it can educate and support its members, and it can provide tools such as the wheel that I mentioned before and others, and sector guidance that can help members with a path forward. And that's exactly what the panel is going to explore today. The challenges that we face and the practical tools that can help us turn ambition into action. So before I pose the first question to the panel, here's one for the audience. Hopefully you're all paying attention. The question is, according to the United Nations, how many people worldwide are highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change? So how many of you think it's more than 500 million? I can see most people, a few people have got their hands up. Keep your hand up if you think it's more than 1 billion people who are affected. And if you think it's more than 2 billion, keep your hand up. And if you think it's more than 3 billion. So well done all of those people who still have their hands up. The figure comes from the UN's IPCC, and as of their 2022 report, 3.5 to 3.6 billion people, so that's nearly half the world's population, are already living in conditions that make them highly vulnerable to climate change. So this means high exposure, high sensitivity, and limited ability to adapt. And in fact, in these vulnerable regions, people are 15 times more likely to be vulnerable to climate change.
John, may I just step in? And the climate crisis is a gender crisis. So women and children are much more impacted.
I was just about to say that, Iris, absolutely. You took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you. So, without further ado, I'd like to ask the panel just to pick up on some of those themes and topics and provide their own perspectives on how ESG expectations have shifted over the past year and what that impact has had on how companies are responding. And perhaps I'll turn to you, John, first, if that's okay.
Sure, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Thanks again to the IEG and CIBJO for this opportunity to speak. The last year or two, we've seen several shifts. We've seen shifts in response to what I would call specific political cycles. And you mentioned the US, and we can't avoid acknowledging that has shifted a lot of the messaging, the communications within the US. It's obviously shifted, regulations or shifting regulations. So the response to what we might call ESG expectations or sustainability objectives, the response in some quarters has undoubtedly changed. How has it changed? It's reasserted short-termism. It's very difficult now to find politicians and some investors who are willing to look beyond the political cycle. That said, you said the science remains the same. There's also a lot of the existing commitments still exist, they're just not being talked about. There's an element of, dare I say, fear in expressing your commitment, but that doesn't necessarily mean the commitment's gone away. And so you often see actions remain, they are just not discussed in public. And that is specific, I think, largely to the US context, although we've seen it in some parts of Europe and elsewhere. So the question of expectations is the expectation of who? The expectation of the consumer, the expectation of society at large, or specific pockets in specific geographies and demographic sectors. The key aspect, I think, is you have to say, okay, well, what does it look like if you look beyond the short term? What were the motivations for us to start to commit in the first place? And they remain, they endure. And so you focused on climate change. Iris quite rightly mentioned gender and social impacts. And one of the things I would say is, in terms of what you call ESG expectations, what we have also seen is a broader acknowledgement that these things are interconnected. So yes, we've got headwinds, we've got responses to the political cycle, which will undoubtedly be, I think it's fair to say, temporary, because political cycles do not endure. But then you've got this broader recognition that climate, nature, and social impacts are interconnected. And I think, commendably, there is now a momentum to say, okay, well, we need to combine our actions, start to build our understanding, particularly when it comes to nature and some of the social impacts that we haven't previously been very good at measuring. So temporary headwinds, enduring long-term objectives.
Thanks, John. And that's a very optimistic and positive message, actually, which is great.
I think it's key to talk about the opportunities as well as the risks, because the science, as you say, sounds overwhelmingly alarming.
Yeah.
That said, the response to the science is actually potentially an opportunity for progress. It can be an opportunity for growth. And I think we need to sometimes reframe the discussion. In climate, we spent a long time talking about the sheer challenge and impacts, the negative impacts of climate. But there are great opportunities to resolve not only climate, or to at least moderate the climate changes, but also solve other problems in doing so. So I think optimism is key.
Thanks, John. Iris, it'd be great to get your perspective, just building on John's comments, please.
Well, I think I'm very aligned with John's perspective, and I'm also quite optimistic in the sense that if you look at the defining sustainability over the past 20 years, you know, it came from originally really community, philanthropy, corporate social responsibility. Now it's always sustainability, which has become a buzzword. I think through the times we are now, it's really about business resilience. And I think that's the good news for sustainability people, that the topic has become actually a more strategic imperative because of the mess we are in. We are, you know, because we're talking about heat waves or droughts or water. These are all key topics actually that are connected to operations. And I think that's where there's an opportunity for sustainability to be really at the core of the business function across business, and it has to be centralized. And I think originally often you saw that sustainability departments were a bit disconnected by the corporate office and by procurement, etc. And today we don't have that time anymore. We cannot waste that time. So we need to think about longevity, we need to think about operational efficiency, we need to de-risk, we need to manage compliance. I think a second point I want to make is, yes, even though there's omnibus, and for several political reasons, the direction will continue to be more transparency and traceability for our industry, and that means we need data. And I think that's where we need to work together more than ever, because if we think about decarbonization, if we think about water ecosystems and all of that, you cannot do that on your own, and that's why I think this is so important. So I'm quite optimistic and very aligned with what John said. And allow me just, John, to say one more thing before I would like to thank also VICENZAORO, but Dr. Gaetano Cavaliere and CIBJO for bringing us together, because it's the first time I think that the industry should really realize that we have no time to waste. We need to now be collaborative.
Great, thanks, Iris. And I think that integration of ESG as a mainstream activity and focus should stand us in good stead. You know, the days of it being off to one side and being a checklist exercise or a box-ticking exercise feel like they're in the past, which gives us another reason for optimism going forward. Wesley, how do you see it? In particular, perhaps you could give some perspective from the SME's perspective.
Absolutely. Thanks, John, and I couldn't agree more with John and Iris. I think what we've seen with the political change has really been that many companies who've had the chance to not do anything, this has given them the chance to continue to do nothing. And I think from an SME perspective, often they don't have their own sustainability departments. They're very much trying to do it themselves, and it's given them a chance to not do anything more. Although there are some SMEs in particular who are already on this journey, who are continuing to do that, and they feel as though they really need to do this more because they need to show that really this is important for their business. So I think it's really given the chance for those who've been reactive to do nothing, and those who want to be proactive continue to be proactive, which unfortunately just means you've got a greater gap between those who are driving ESG versus those who are not. And I think we need to do what we can to encourage those who have given the chance to not do anything to do something.
Great, thanks, Wes. And I guess one of the things that comes out of those comments is this affects everybody. SMEs in particular have specific barriers and challenges, but actually across the industry, across CIBJO, everyone can make a contribution, and this is something that affects everybody. So Helen, perhaps I can turn to you now for a perspective, a broader perspective, based on your work in this and in other industries.
Good morning. Thanks, John, and good morning, everybody in the room and online, and good morning to my friends on the panel. I completely agree with what you've said so far. One of the interesting aspects of working in the ESG space is that it's a very fast-moving discipline, and these shifts are just part of an ongoing continuum of change. What I'm seeing across industries is that there are, at the macro level, there are three major shifts, one of which is that thankfully, now that ESG is more widely accepted as not just a nice to have, it is driving investors and businesses to demand more proof of tangible action, not just commitments. So as the panel has already said, you know, all of those promises and those pledges that have been made so far, now you need to show that they are being worked on and that progress is being made. So businesses that set those near-term carbon reduction targets for 2030 or 2035 need to show that they have been working on that reduction and are moving towards that target. And the same for improving diversity in the workforce or in the supply chain. What that's driving, of course, is this shift to treat ESG as core to business, not as a side activity, as you've already said. So I'm starting to see much greater focus on the key aspects of ESG that drive real business value. And I was reading recently some research that Morgan Stanley had done, and they talked about that 80% of companies now track measurable return on investment from ESG work. So we're shifting from that, let's do something and try it, and now we're seeing that it actually does drive the bottom line. And which business out there is not interested in driving an improvement to their bottom line? Secondly, as John Mulligan mentioned, we are seeing a shift to more quiet action and less public declarations. It's called greenhushing. It's not particularly a positive move because, as Iris said, we need more transparency. And we need to help each other know and learn about what does work. And importantly, we need to be really much braver and bolder about talking about what we've learned that didn't work, so that, you know, again and again, we're not each individually making mistakes that have already been made. We can leapfrog off what other companies have already learned. And lastly, I think it was Iris who talked about resilience. Absolutely, there's a shift now much more to looking at climate resilience. So how businesses are protecting and defending their profits, but also looking at how they're adjusting their business models and operations to be much more climate adaptive and to be more in sync with the volatility that this climate change and climate crisis is bringing to us all, and a focus on materiality. So, and I think we're going to be talking a bit more about this as we go through the panel, but ESG is a full body workout. It is not one person's job. And to make that manageable, you need to apply a materiality lens to ESG. It's a very broad topic, particularly on the G, the governance side. It can be as broad and as deep as you want to make it. But if you apply materiality, then you are really focusing on what's relevant to your business. And which business out there doesn't want to better understand the impacts, risks, and opportunities that come from this changing world that we're now in? And that's what materiality assessments will do. It will flag up risks that at the moment are often overlooked or not fully understood.
Great, thanks, Helen. And just to pull out one of the points that you made there around learning from mistakes and learning from things that go well and sharing experiences, I think that's very pertinent to CIBJO, a large trade organisation with lots of different companies, which, as John and Iris have both said, some of them are quite advanced and others really haven't started yet. So there's a huge opportunity here for disseminating knowledge and experience and case studies and celebrating success and sharing that with companies who maybe are behind the curve. Great, thanks, panel. So I'm going now to move on to just a quick question for the audience to test that you're all still awake. how has your focus on ESG changed over the past year? So if your focus on ESG has increased, could you put your hand up? Yeah, there's a few people. If it stayed the same, raise your hand. Yeah. And are there any people in the room for whom it's reduced, or for your businesses it's reduced? Okay. So I think there's so for those of you online, not a representative poll necessarily, but most people in the room are saying that their focus on ESG has either increased or stayed the same, with one or two exceptions who are saying it's reduced. So I think that backs up the optimism on the panel, and the fact that you know, the science doesn't change, and this stuff is still important to businesses, and they're continuing to focus on it. So, having said that, there are still significant gaps and challenges and barriers. So, I'd like to ask the panel now just to comment on what some of those barriers and gaps are still. So perhaps, Iris, can I turn to you first? What do you see as the major barriers and challenges out there that remain?
So first of all, I think, unfortunately, not yet the topic is often integrated strategically at the C-suite level. So then I'm talking about the bigger companies, I would say with exceptions of the big brands. Second, I think it's also about the SMEs, because I think for the SMEs, they are often the partners of many of those bigger companies. So the bigger brands, they are asking data, information, compliance requirements, implementation and operationalization of legislation. And these SMEs, which I deeply admire, are small family businesses, like you rightly said, John and Helen, who don't have that capacity. And we are looking then from de-risking to opportunity to capacity building. So it's really, I think, that suppliers are the extended family, and we need to see it as one family. So I think it's mindset, I think it's suppliers' engagement, capacity building. And then I think it's a topic that is really important, is that the industry for the past 25 years, when I came in early 2000 with the Kimberley process, the big topics were social justice. We looked at decent labor, human rights, in all of those topics. Well, today we need to think about just transition. We need to think about the interconnection between climate, nature, and human rights. And that's where we need to go deeper, John, because today still too many people are using human rights due diligence even as a tick box exercise, which it's not. It takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of commitment, it takes a lot of collaboration in the supply chain. So I would say the last challenge is real, genuine collaboration. Yeah. And I really also liked what Helen said is, if we want to do this well, we need to do it based on the right methodology, taking the right time, using the right consultation and multi-stakeholder model to be able to do that double materiality so extensively, which is good for the whole industry to protect the integrity, because we are an industry of trust, and trust is the biggest currency. If that's breached, who are we then as an industry?
Great, thanks, Iris. And it's interesting hearing you there, that you have obviously spent a lot of time at the Watch and Jewellery Initiative thinking really deeply about what the challenges are, because if we don't think about the challenges and what makes it hard for companies, then we can't address those challenges and we can't make progress.
No, and allow me to congratulate you, John and Helen, and with Dr. Kitano and all of you on, building that wheel. I think it's such an important step for the industry to understand there is an agenda, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel. There is the wheel, there is the vision of 2030. We need to get everyone on board. I think that's where the Responsible Jewelry Council, the Initiative, CIBJO, the World Gold Council, united, we can really scale this. And then we'll be able to protect the integrity of the industry.
Thanks, Iris. I'm going to suggest that we come back to solutions, because I think there are some great solutions that are being developed and tools in a moment. For now, let's stick with barriers. And John, perhaps you could share your thoughts.
Thanks. So the question says, what are the biggest gaps? And it's already been mentioned, Wes mentioned, that the gap between the leaders, those that are resourced, aware, already acting, and the rest. And I think that the danger, the risk is that gap widens and you get disengagement, particularly from the SMEs and the small businesses. So we have to find ways of narrowing the gap. And I mentioned optimism very frequently as when you seek to be an agent of change, you need to define the incentives. What incentivizes change and what simplifies it? And so with my experience, thankfully, I'm privileged with the Watch and Jewellery Initiative and with CIBJO, whenever we've tried to define the tools and resources you're talking about, the first obstacle we overcome is how do we make this accessible and simple enough for those that aren't previously aware or acting? And then how do we try, and this is something we still need to do, how do we try and articulate the opportunity, the incentive? So I think we'll come to the tools. There is now, I would like to say, or there will be within the next few months, next year, a range of resources which should be sufficient to get started. But how do we, as an industry, try and converge, try and address that fragmentation, because this is the difficulty. One of the difficulties in the jewellery sector is you have a vast dispersed industry in pretty much every country in the world that's facing the consumer, but hasn't really necessarily understood the supply chain going back upstream. And I think trying to articulate the opportunity to make that engagement easier, and then everybody said it, avoid that fragmentation, in fact, address it by saying, this is the incentive to start to move together.
Yeah. So there's some themes in there that come through very strongly around the gap between those that are moving ahead more rapidly in this area and those that aren't. Also, you talked about the challenge of a fragmented industry. Irish, you talked about mindset. We touched on tools and businesses not having the tools that they need in order to make progress. Helen, if I can just turn to you, are these barriers typical of other industries? Do you see others? Is CIBJO different to some of the other industries that you work in?
No, they're definitely not alone here at all within the jewellery industry. I see it across lots of other industries. It's definitely a mixed bag, geographically and between different sizes of companies. And yes, there is this gap between intention and execution. I think, ESG just is not showing up enough on the board agenda, or whatever the highest level of executive oversight that exists within an organisation. So much smaller companies may not have a more formalised board structure. It may be a committee, but it's just not there enough. And to close that gap that we've been talking about, we do need to have more top-down leadership on ESG topics. I ask every company that I work with, if you have 15 minutes with your board or that most senior executive level oversight, what would you want to talk about? And the answer that I typically get is, oh, it never comes up. And, that needs to change. And, that yes, we know that there's complexity around not having a single standard, a consistent standard across that all companies can follow. But we are seeing much more standards being produced for SMEs. So, I'm optimistic that is moving in the right direction, and that will help close the gap because it provides a bit more of a framework for SMEs. As John Mulligan said, there's more and more tools that's coming out through CIBJO and through our other related initiatives that are supporting. But I think that, this gap at the board level, and this gap around an awareness of the business opportunity and the business benefit, the drivers of value, real value creation, is still at a relatively low level. and more work needs to be done there.
Thanks, Helen. So we're going to focus in now on a couple of elements that can address those barriers. So the first of those is tools which CIBJO can share and provide to its members, but closely linked to that, in my mind, are examples of those tools in action and the ability to use those tools, particularly by the leaders on ESG, and to transfer that knowledge and that experience to others who maybe are less familiar with those tools. So just before we dive into that, a question for the audience. Just trying to get the next slide up. Question for the audience. To what extent do you feel like you have sufficient tools and support to take action on ESG? So for those of you who feel you've got those tools and support, could you put your hand up? Yeah, so there's some people. I guess this is a fairly self-selective audience in some respects, but those of you who feel they don't have the tools...
I'm so happy to see this.
Those who feel they don't have the tools to support them.
So, John, yesterday, John, we had somebody on the panel who basically, one of the questions we said was, are you aware of the support for your industry? He was a technology, advanced technology and fabricator in the jewelry space. And we said, are you aware of the tools to support your journey on responsible sourcing? And he said, not really. And so we said, okay, well, we will try and address that today. But I think it's fair to say if that was a representative sample of one, that we know there's a lack of awareness of the tools more broadly.
Yeah, and I think even in this audience, actually, there were a small minority of people who put their hand up who were saying, I guess, two things. One, no, there aren't enough tools. We could do with some more tools. And others who are not aware of those tools, like the person that you mentioned, John. So what we're going to do now is share some of the tools which are available to CIBJO members. And I'd like to start with Wesley, if that's okay, Wesley.
Of course. Do you mind sharing the slides? Thank you. So thanks, John. I think the journey that I've gone on and what I really wanted to share over the next few minutes was, from an ESG perspective, I was relatively new to ESG over the last year or so. But what I felt was important is to share that with the group here, and how can we use the CIBJO tools, which have already been shared practically for SMEs. I think ultimately that gap we were describing of SMEs and big corporates is clear, and really what I wanted to do is be an example. So I work in De Beers Group, which many of you know, but I also work in a group called Frevmark, which is effectively an SME within De Beers Group. We have less than 100 employees, and I felt we don't have any sustainability experts within Frevmark, and so I took up the mantle of being that sustainability expert, if you like, to take it forward, to see how do we address ESG within Frevmark. And what I realized, actually, even before I started that work using the CIBJO tools, I needed to make sure that I could justify internally, which I think is not unusual for SMEs, why I was doing this work. And if someone said to me, why am I spending this time? I knew I had to have an explanation. And so what I've used here, this is a slide which Helen shared in January, which ultimately tells us that the business case for measuring ESG is strong. And there's two elements that I decided to take. Whenever anyone asked me why I was doing this work, the two I focused on was ESG makes sense and it makes financial sense. It either gives you extra growth or it gives you greater valuation of your business. There's an enormous amount of studies which have demonstrated that, and I would make sure that I would include and ensure that people knew that whenever they asked me why I was doing this work. The second one is on the bottom here, as you can see. ESG helps you run your business better. And I've already found that even in the work that I've done so far, that when you start to look at the energy usage, when you start to look at your water usage, when you start to look at the practical elements within your business, you can see savings immediately. And I think these are the practical elements that I needed to make sure I had in my armory when anyone asked, why are you wasting your time on this ESG work? And this has really helped me in my first stage. The next thing I needed to do was ultimately go back to the principles that we shared in 2023. This is the wheel that Iris just touched on, and which I hope many of you are familiar with. But again, this is reminding ourselves, this links directly into United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. This is why we produced it, and something that people could use themselves. And then, certainly the most important step was when we started giving 10 steps. And this is what we published in January, 10 steps that we did with Helen, with John, both Johns, in January to show how do you start this process. And really this is what I did myself. I thought, I'm now representing Frevmark. How do I do this as an SME? So we needed to nominate an owner responsible. That was me. We needed to familiarize ourselves with the 14 ESG principles. I did that again. But the most important step, and the one I didn't realize until I went through this work myself, how do you identify the most important topics to focus on for your business? And I didn't even know what materiality matrix meant until I started to do this work. And I realized that as an SME, they probably don't know what materiality matrix means either. And this is what I needed to start to investigate. So if you look on this chart here, this is my own materiality matrix. And what I did, it took me actually quite a bit of time to find one which I felt was right. There's a myriad of examples online, but this is the one which really worked for me and worked for us as an SME. So on the left-hand side, you can see what is important to our stakeholders. And then on the bottom axis, what is important to our Frevmark business, either from a growth perspective or from an impact perspective. And by combining these two, this is the important aspect for us to prioritize what was important for our business. So if you look at this particular chart itself, you'll see that I've laid all of those 14 principles which were in the wheel in terms of importance. Anyone can do this, any SME can do this, you can do this tomorrow, but I didn't know this even existed or how to do this. And I'm just going to take you through one of the examples that I've got on here. So ethics and transparency. From a Frevmark perspective, this is extremely important, and that's why it's on the top right-hand corner of this particular chart. It's important to our stakeholders, and it's important to our Frevmark business. We're a responsibly traced diamond brand. We need to make sure that our stakeholders, our consumers, and also our business do this properly. So if I use the tools that CIBJO gave to us, what did I then need to do? So I took the measurement guidelines which were published in January, and I said to myself, Step 2, identify the priority areas of measurement. What metric can I use within that area to demonstrate that we are doing the right thing, and where do we sit? So I looked through all of the metrics that were published in January, and I said to myself, for ethics and transparency, the one I need to focus on, do we have a code of conduct? Do we have other business policies which are endorsed by the top management? And I realized that actually, even just by choosing one metric, I started on that journey. So in reality, what then did I do? I did this for all of the different 9 elements which were in, if I go back to the matrix, all of those ones encircled in the red area, the most important aspects for us as a business. I then did that work for each of the different items, as you can see on here. So on the left-hand side, you have the guideline metric. Then in the middle, you have the plan for sourcing the information to measure. So I knew that I wanted to evaluate the code of conduct, the other business policies, but I needed to ascertain, do we have those policies? Do we use those policies? Are these policies that we use within Frevmark? Do people even know they exist? And really this was, for me, the eye-opener in how you move forward from an SME perspective. Take a measure, find a metric, check it's important for you as a business, then ascertain whether or not there's any gaps. And this is a very, very simple road to trying to share with people on the beginning now, how you move on this ESG journey. And really what I wanted just to share was, even though this is just me starting on this journey, last year I was ready. I had my running gear on, but I was sitting on the side. I wasn't really doing very much, but I wanted to do something. The intent was there, but I hadn't moved. And I guess over the last year, it really feels as though we have something in the UK which is called Couch to 5K. And for those who really don't want to get off their sofa and go for a run, you know that you have to do it, but you have to just do it. And I feel as though I'm in the middle here. I've actually got off my sofa, I've put my running gear on, and I've given it a go. And now I feel as though I can actually talk with sustainability experts. It was brilliant. I was on the bus earlier talking with Estelle. I feel as though I can have these conversations now that a year ago I couldn't have actually done. And it's only because I've used the tools which CIBJO have provided in January and last year that I could actually start to have those conversations. And I don't know if I'll ever get to
You're going to
Usain
the
Bolt.
Olympics.
You won't, Wes.
Thanks, John.
You might do.
So we might not get to Usain Bolt's level, but in reality, we know what the journey looks like now. And I'm really hoping that the work that we start to do within CIBJO and these examples help SMEs in particular move on this journey. So you can at least get off the couch and start to move on that journey to Usain Bolt. And there are many Usain Bolts actually within this room which we can learn from as well. So make sure we utilize and learn from that as well.
So well done, Wes. I think you don't need to train for the sprint. I need to train for the marathon. That's the trick. But,
Okay, I'll
And
need to change
let's
it.
But
do
now
New
you've got the
York.
five.
eh?
Now you've
Let's
got-
do New York.
Sounds
So,
good.
Wes, thanks very much. And listening to that, I heard several things that there's clearly, which address the barriers that we talked about before. So there is a tool available here. There's a tool available here which can enable an SME to take action. But as importantly, there's a story around it now of a real SME that has gone through this, as Wes puts it, the couch to 5K of using the tool and telling others across CIBJO how they used the tool, the value it created. And you can tell from Wes, right? When he first thought about this, it was a daunting undertaking. He was probably thinking, oh my God, I've got to do this ESG, DMA, went online, lots of different approaches. But now he's energized, he's done it, and he's still going. And he may get to Usain Bolt's level, who knows, but more as importantly, he can address that barrier that we touched on before, which is disseminating the knowledge to others and helping others across CIBJO to make the same journey. So I'd like to hand over to Iris now and talk about Watch and Jewellery Initiative, because we can't do justice to every tool today, but I know, Iris, you have a very wide spectrum of tools as well.
Well, thank you very much, and really congrats, Wes, well done, and I think you explained it magnificently. So first of all, for those of you online or present here that do not know who the Watch and Jewellery Initiative 2030 is, we're actually a very young initiative, co-founded by Maison Cartier, delegated by Richemont and the Caring Group. And we are not a standards body, but we are really a multi-stakeholder action platform that wants to accelerate 3 interconnected pillars: climate, biodiversity, and nature and inclusiveness. And I'm not going to go into the detail today, but under every pillar, we have very, very in-depth work streams. And for us, it's really the objective of the initiative to be able to scale some of those solutions. So we're testing it, we're building proof of concepts with scientists, with legal compliance, with top experts. And once we feel that the solution is ready, we bring it to open source. Today, actually, I want to talk about nature and biodiversity because it's a topic that has not yet been fully embraced by the industry, often by leading brands. If we think about the Caring Group, who started this already, more than 15 years ago, or if you look at what some of the other brands are doing. But if we think about business resilience, you need to think, where are your materials coming from, in which eco landscape? And this could be, colored gemstones from Madagascar, this could be diamonds from Botswana, this could be minerals from somewhere in the world. What kind of dependencies do you have on nature? And what was the approach, John? It was, first of all, we started, and I talked to Estelle about it, we started with a nature action playbook for someone who had never talked about nature and understood about how nature is connected to sustainability. So we've invested a lot in education. Then we built a nature roadmap. It took 18 months through multi-stakeholder consultation with the World Economic Forum, World Business Council of Sustainable Development, TNFD, all of it. We put it into open consultation. We're updating it again because of regulations. And now we're building actually tools, and the tools are live, and we're testing the tools with some of the leading brands and suppliers. How do you operationalize nature as part of your business strategy? So we started from education, you call it, no, you don't know anything about nature, playbook with help desk support, proof of concept, and now actually we're starting to collect the first data with ESG book, which is, you know, one of the most sophisticated technologies that 10 of the top banks of the world use to be able to also look at accountability. So that's one. Gender, I'm not going to go too much into detail, but as you know, we have our 3rd year of collaboration with UN Women. We've been testing the waters on gender responsive procurement. If we want to accelerate the gender agenda in our industry, which is so important, we need to see that we have more women at the top, more women in governance across business functions. But at the same time, how much do you know that you're buying from women entrepreneurs? So we've been working with UN Women, we're working on tools, and I would really invite you to join in. You're always welcome to participate, and we'll be coming out with a very big update in January in Davos on that collaboration. And then something what I'm particularly proud of with humility is the Impact Action Journey Framework. This is a fully digital solution with educational support, and we're working closely with CIBJO on some of this work to really operationalize, to help companies of different sizes to be able to implement those 3 interconnected pillars. And the beauty is that you actually have live data that you can continuously update, and the tool is fully aligned with international policies. And that's where we also believe we have an important role. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We believe that it's very important to operationalize legislation and standards. And then I think finally one hot topic also is living wage. As you know, we have a collaboration now. We've done 6 months of education on living wage, and we're doing now big gap analysis and framework building to help the industry advance on that topic, because if we're able to get the concept of living wage right into the value chains, we will contribute to development. So I just want to reiterate the message that the initiative is here to work together with all of you and also to share what we have in open source once we feel it's ready.
Great, thanks so much, Iris. It's quite hard to do justice to all these tools in such a short space of time. So well done, Iris and Wes, for doing that. As you'll see, there's a very large number of tools available. And just to show you a snapshot of some of those, these are all tools which are available to CIBJO members. We've talked about some of them today, Iris and Wesley. There are others on there as well. John, did you want to just say a couple of comments on this, and also maybe the practice group as well?
Sure, and so the list there is, it's a partial list, but it's indicative of the fact there are a lot of reference points and tools around, and it's great to hear people actually implement them. If you're responsible for writing these tools, you never really know how much they're being used unless you start to talk to the people using them. So great. Within CIBJO, I talked yesterday about responsible sourcing being foundational. Within a matter of months, we'll be planning to publish a revised responsible sourcing blue book. So it's 5 years since, over 5 years since the first one was published. So now we're updating it. So there will be a foundational blue book on responsible sourcing, but there will also be, and some of you have very kindly reviewed it over the last year, a fundamental ESG and sustainability reference guide, which is fairly substantial, but it seeks to draw this stuff together. So it seeks to include all of these resources, references specifically to the Watch and Jewellery Initiative and other resources, references to the Responsible Jewellery Council, references to all of the regulatory framework. It's a fairly substantial piece, but you can dip into it to find what's available in terms of some of the resources we've found. So I see that as a foundational, fundamental reference guide, and that will also be published soon, and that makes specific reference, of course, to the implementation tools such as the wheel. So The idea being that once both the updates and the new material is out, CIBJO, along with the Watch and Jewellery Initiative and others, will have provided, I think, a fairly comprehensive range of reference points. Now, the question is, how do you get people to use them? And that's still a question. I think going forward, I think I speak for hopefully...
Hold that thought.
Okay,
John.
thank you.
Yeah, because one of the things that I think we wanted to do as a panel today was to combine the tools, which as John has described, there's a wealth of tools that are available, with the stories. And you've heard one of those from Wesley of how they're being used, which I guess is one way to bring them to life. Before we close, we've got 5 minutes left. One of the things that I won't ask this question to the audience now, but want to lodge with everyone who's watching online or who's here in the room, getting involved in developing these tools and using them is really important, because probably today we're talking to people who are the leaders in ESG and who are more up to speed with things like double materiality assessment and some of the other tools that we've talked about. So it's really important that those of us who are further up the curve help those that aren't. Use the tools, tell others about the tools, and disseminate them throughout CIBJO. I'm going to ask the panel, if they can, to just combine a couple of questions here. So the first one is around reasons for optimism. So we talked a little bit about some of the challenges and barriers before, but please give us, as an industry, some reasons for optimism. And secondly, if you can touch on some of the things that you're going to be doing over the next year, I think that would be really useful. And I haven't given you much time, I realise. So who would like to go first?
We better hurry up, shouldn't we? I think I've already laid out, I think, one of the reasons for optimism, and that is this simply makes business sense. It also better aligns your business with wider societal expectations. And ultimately, if you're willing to look beyond the very short term, you are contributing to solutions that will have a positive impact for generations to come. So that's the reason for optimism. The challenge is getting that, and Iris mentioned it, getting that embedded in a mindset, a business mindset. That's, but we're now talking about this. Probably the other reason for optimism is, in my 20-odd years in the industry, it's only the last 4 or 5 years we've been talking together, realistically, in terms of the supply chain. And I think that's a reason for optimism. Great, thanks, John. Iris.
I'm anyway an optimist in life, so I have a positive mindset. I'm also optimistic because there's no other option for us as an industry, because we are in jewelry, we are in beauty, we're in art and creations. So we depend, our core depends on trust and transparency. So if we breach that, you know, we can never attract that customer. Second, we want talent, you know, we want young people to come into this industry. We're about craftsmanship, savoir-faire. Look at Italy. And congrats, Dr. Katana Cavaliere, with your new school, which I think is fantastic. If we want youngsters to come into our industry, we need to stay attractive and relevant. So for me, there's no other option. And I understand we're going to be a bit more quiet. I agree with you, Helen. I think greenwashing is not an option, but okay, let it be. We just need to do the work that we as an industry and as a collective we can be proud. And second, what I do believe is we need more genuine collaboration. I still unfortunately see that too many people are reinventing the wheel, and efforts are not aligned. And I think, first of all, it's operational inefficiency, and second, it confuses it confuses people, it confuses journalists, it confuses audiences. So I'm very grateful to CIBJO for really, I think for the first time, uniting the industry. And I think Dr. Gaetano Cavalieri, I think you're the only one actually who can bring everybody around the table to really work together. And we need to really now do that, but genuinely. We should really stop the politics, put our ego down, and work together with respecting dignity to protect this beautiful industry we work for.
Great. Thanks, Iris. I see we're coming to the end. I would say, Wesley, I did feel you gave us some great optimism from your case study in terms of demonstrating that this stuff is possible and you can make a difference once you get started. And I just turned to Helen. Is there anything you would add?
Well, just that, you know, as Wes so ably demonstrated, is that you can, as a business leader, you can balance ESG with the trade-offs necessary to prioritize growth. So it is not an either or. And the other thing I would say is don't let perfection be the enemy of good. Take action, start that running down that marathon track, because it really does pay off, and we've seen that today. So really well done.
Great, thanks everyone. We nearly did it. We're just on the hour. Just very briefly, I'd like to say a huge thank you to the panel. Massive amount of experience, that some of which has been shared today, and I thank them for their insights. We hope the session has given CIBJO members a sense for some of the tools which are available and which are being developed, and more importantly, a story around how those tools can be used, and some optimism for how the two could come together over the next year and beyond. So whether you're relatively early on in your journey or you're more advanced, please get involved by using the tools, making progress on ESG, and really importantly, being willing to share with the industry those successes and sometimes failures so that we can all move together and learn from each other. On CIBJO's part, CIBJO will continue to develop the tools and share with the industry, along with Watch and Jewellery Initiative and others who are developing tools across the industry. And we're going to say more about that at the Congress in Paris, and even more about that next year in Vicenza. It's CIBJO's 100th anniversary, which you'll be hearing a lot more about. It really feels to me like there's an opportunity here to bring together the toolkit, all of those really useful tools, with success stories and stories of how the tools are being used over the course of the next year and beyond. So that's all from the panel. I can see Gaetano here waiting in the wings. I'm going to hand over the microphone.
Thank you very much. Let me first thank you, John, and this esteemed panel, and Helen, that unfortunately this time is not with us, but present on the screen and obviously in the spirit. I would like to go back to one of, this one. I was sitting quietly in the audience, but after what I heard, congratulations for what I heard, and after what I saw coming into the room, this esteemed, selected audience present, but even more esteemed audience online. But passing by, I saw a room, and I saw what was the subject that they were talking about, with the number of people, maybe 80, 100 people in the room. So I was wondering, what is the difference? Because a room is small, with 100 people in, and the room or theater like this, with a selected audience in person, and again, a more selected audience online. Well, I enjoyed when I saw this slide. Thank you, Wesley, And I see that the ESGs and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, on which I am personally involved since 1998. When I was talking about corporate social responsibility, the people was looking at me like somebody's coming from Mars. Today, maybe instead of coming from Mars, it's coming from the moon because it's closer. But still, I can feel a distance. I am very privileged to be part of quite all the organization in the world as founding members or board members and so on. But, and I said yesterday that we can make our full compliance towards our mission statement working collectively. And this is the example, seated in a site, running in the field, running at a high level of competition. If the people do not understand, or maybe sometimes they are too busy in making their living, and if they do not understand that because of this, because the will, because the goals, because the ESG and so on, they can dramatically improve their business and make more money. So there are only two elements. Or is our fault that we are not capable to communicate properly? Or is the fact that the people, even though we are doing every effort, and by the way, we will never give up, we will continue, and we will continue with much more enthusiasm than what we have done up to now. So my closing remark is, please use it. We are putting together collectively CIBJO, Watch and Jewellery Initiative, World Gold Council, De Beers, Responsible Jewelry Council, World Diamond Council, and so on. Tools on the table. If are not fully understandable, please give us your support and criticize. We certainly are there to take all these inputs very seriously. None of us is God, because there is one who lives in the penthouse. But on top of it, if we don't make and comply with all these things, well, business has changed and is constantly changing. And I believe that in order to meet the markets and the consumer, which are highly informed, also about ESG, sustainability, provenance, transparency, certification, and so on, well, I think that we will not comply with our role. We do our role because of passion, not because of money, which is a completely different concept. And we do with passion because we want this industry to grow and flourish much more than what has been done up to now. We are contributing. We want to see your contribution, for those that are not in the room or not online, much more visible. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gaetano. Thanks again, everybody. And thanks again to the panel.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. Bye for my friends on the panel.
Thanks a lot, Helen.
Helen, can you still...
Bye-bye.